Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining me again in this series where we discuss testing Spring applications. So very happy to see you back. By the way, as usual, if you are live here with me, you can write me in the live chat. I always keep an eye on the live chat, and if not, you can always put your comments in the comment section or find me on LinkedIn or X. Today we continue our discussion about testing with stubs. Just to remind you, for the last time we discussed about mock MVC and controller tests, and we've discussed the fact that you can go up to like even the database and eventually proxies. And in terms of proxies, you almost never will like recall a real you will almost never want to call the real service that your application calls. So then today, this is what we discuss. What tool can we use and what kinds of tests can we use to test the behavior of a proxy class? And for that, and I'm gonna already share you my screen. For that, I have changed our small application here to include a proxy class. So my service class here, now I've changed it slightly to call this get book cover. No, it's just I have imagined this proxy. You can understand, you remember it's still a very small dummy application. No, don't take this application as an example. Take the testing discussion as the good stuff here in this playlist. So I've just imagined, what if I have to take the book covers from a different service, which in my imagination would provide me an image as the book cover. And what I do is I've changed the book entity to have the cover as an array of bytes because it was the easiest way. I just imagine this goes into my database. And then the service sets this image, which will be stored into the database, and which it retrieves using a proxy object from a different service. And here it is. And I usually prefer using this http bean.org as a mock server. Now, it's a very nice tool. If you haven't ever used http bean.org, imagine if you need a test endpoint for something, instead of having to write it yourself. Usually most of the endpoints, the test endpoints you find them at this address. And you can even download and run a Docker image with it on your local if you want. So you can call it remotely, you can call it on your local machine. It's a very nice tool for testing. So in this case, for example, this just returns you a random PNG image. So I've tested it with this random PNG image, which in my case is the book cover. Okay. Fine enough, the functionality, it's not that relevant. No, what's relevant is the design we've changed. So now our service, the use case, which we know already, it was working with a database, it contained one condition, it was storing the data. Now it does one more thing. It calls a different service to do something. Is this something common in microservices and service-oriented architectures? Yes, it's very common. You will very often find situations where, in a way or another, a different server is called. And usually how we do that is we segregate the responsibility in a proxy class. So here the service calls a proxy, which the proxy further calls the other service, the other application, sometimes getting back something. Like in my case here, I tried to keep the method as simple as possible because, again, for our demonstration purpose, it doesn't make sense to have complicated implementations, because otherwise it wouldn't allow you to focus anymore on the important thing that we discuss, which is testing. And now the question will be, what do we do in a real real application when we have such a situation? How do we test this? Well, I have already adjusted test classes from 1 to 6, which we created. Test 7 is empty, is for today. This is what we learned today. But 1 to 6, I have already adjusted them. And to make them work, one of the solutions, and I think you guessed that already, is mocking the proxy itself. Okay, you mocked it, you can now make it do whatever you want. For example, here I can add one more when, and then I can make it throw an exception, and then I can test the logic using mocks. You can always do that like we do with the repository, like we actually did up to now with the repository. Today the same. Next time we'll talk about alternatives, similar alternatives for repository classes, but today we start with proxies. So you can use mocks, fine enough, but then that means you end now with the testing, you put the border of the testing before the proxy, so you don't actually call the proxy itself. Good. Now, what if I want to go inside the proxy, then I don't really have a lot of things to test in here, and usually this is the case. So usually you don't have a lot of things that you can test in a proxy method, because the only thing it usually does is that it calls a specific method on a specific URI, sometimes providing headers, body, and then getting back headers, body, and so on. But it doesn't make sense to test this get and this URI and this retrieve and this body. They are part of the REST client library, which has its own tests. So this is nothing you can test here. What you can actually test here is the contract itself, which means that if you don't want to mock it like we did here, the alternative is to simulate the server that you call. So you kind of put an object outside your application, which you can configure to respond in a way or another, and depending on these responses, to evaluate a specific test case. So it acts like a mock, but it's a mock from outside the application, which fakes the real application that your app would actually call in a real situation. And then you can control that object, that fake object outside your application, and you can tell it to do, I don't know, different things like reply with slowness. See what happens if that service blocks your call for 5 seconds. And then you can test this way a circuit breaker, for example. No? Or what happens if that service throws an error or doesn't reply at all? Or what happens if it replies with the correct data? Or what happens if it replies with a different contract than the agreed one? And this way you can test how your logic in your application behaves in these certain situations. And this fake object that lays outside your application, this is called a stub. So remember, mock is a fake object inside your application, like we used up to now here, Mockito bin, here the book repository or the book cover proxy here are mocked. It is a fake object inside the application, and precisely here, because this is a Spring Boot test inside the Spring context itself, Spring will basically take it as the real object and inject it where you say, in this case, for example, okay, here we use a mock MVC, but in this case, for example, here in the book service, no? And I think I actually had a question about how does this work. It's very simple. Spring works the same way. It's just that here, because of using the Mockito bin, instead of creating a real bin, it creates this fake object that you can control. So when this is inside, when this is a fake object inside, it's called a mock. When it is a fake object outside, That is a stub. So what we learned today is creating stubs which enable us to test proxy classes. This is the way in which you test proxy classes and several of the scenarios where proxies are involved. I would say it's basically the only way in which you can really test proxy classes, because the alternative is to simply mock them. So in your case, in your testing strategy, because that's what we were discussing, as an alternative, you would actually have what? Either the possibility for mocking completely the proxy and then say, hey, it works, but you don't like test the integration between your app and another app. Or you may want to actually test that contract as well, same as you've learned to test the contract using mock MVC in this case. For what? For your endpoints. No? So the difference between what we learned last time and what we learned today is that last time we've learned to test our own contracts, the contracts of the endpoints of our application. Today, we learn to test the contracts of the applications that we call to ensure that our app's logic, that our app behaves the way we want when the other application behaves right or wrong in different ways. So for this, basically, we will use a tool that's called WireMock. And for that, I have already added this dependency to save time in the POM XML. You can see this dependency called WireMock is defined still in the test scope because it's only needed when we run tests for our application. But this dependency will enable us create stubs that we can use in our tests. So in this testing 7 application tests, we will build our first WireMock test that uses a stub, and will test not only the logic, but also we'll see what happens when the real application, when the request goes outside of the application. It will not call the real application, no, but it will call this fake object that we create and control to define several test cases. Hi everyone, I see your messages in the chat. Thank you very much for being here, and I hope you will enjoy this episode as well. With that being said, let's jump on the business. So the first thing that all of you, it's already, you need to define a test class, a test method, sorry. So this is a test class, and here we have the use cases, and nothing changes here. So nothing changes, the test will be the same. The display name will be the same. Remember, I will not lose time now writing, but remember, given when then, given when then, and so on. No, the way I've taught you to do the things now, starting with the first episode. Remember, very important. No, this doesn't change. So test annotation before each, before all, after each. These are still the things you use to define your test skeleton. What you need here is to, however, instead of a mock, use something more special, which is that defining that kind of mock server outside. And for that, first of all, because it's a real kind of server, it will have to use its own port. So the first thing you need to do when you expect using WireMock and defining stubs is using the WireMock test annotation, which will allow you set the HTTP port that this stub uses. So when this test runs now, it will start a stub on port 8081. This stub, you will configure it to do whatever you want when specific endpoints that you assume it's theirs. It will basically assume, you'll see immediately how, no? How you do that. And then the normal thing you do is the same, so you will still have to test something. What? The service, no? You still want to say test this add book method. This is what we are doing. So if you want to do that, you will do the exactly same thing you were already doing, and that is auto wiring the book service that you want to test, and then calling. My keyboard, unfortunately, I still didn't change it, so I have a Windows keyboard on a Mac. It doesn't go very well, so I will have to adjust. And yeah, and then you call this, no, and say book is new book, and then you set whatever you need for your test, ISBN and the title, and this will go as a parameter here. These are the same things basically we did earlier in our tests, and then you can assert something, no? Then you can verify that the save has been called, or you take the book as a result, no? Edit book, I think we called it, and then you make assertions out of it. Assert not null, for example, and more things, all those things that we did. But the point is now, what we were doing earlier was just mocking the repository. So we were mocking this repository, and that was it. Now if you take a look here in this one, of course I have added the proxy myself, because otherwise the test would not work. But what we did last time, if you follow the video, you will see that we didn't have anything else than the repository. So we were mocking the repository, and then we were using the when method to tell the mock repository what to do, and based on that we were on a situation or another. So for this case here, it says when the find by ISBN, that is this method here, is called with the ISBN of the book, then return an optional containing something, which means that if I keep it this way, it will go through the exception. I don't want that. I will change this and I will say it returns an empty optional. So if I do that, then what will happen? It's that this will be a false, and then it will go on the else, and it will try to call my proxy. And what I want to do here, which is different than what I did here, I don't want to mock anymore the proxy. I want to let the flow go through the real proxy and instead use a stub object. And that's why I have added this wire mock test above. So first of all, let's analyze a bit how the proxy works. So we use the REST client, which is the library, the Spring, let's say, tool that allows us today to send REST clients. And we have this book cover URL, which I presumably take from a property in the application, in the application properties or application YAML file. So in the profile of the running profile of the Spring Boot application. And then I test it with this one, this column here. It means that this happens if this one is not defined, no? So in our case, what we want is to define it. And where do you think should this actually go? What URL should I have here in order to use the stub? The URL of the stub, of course. And where do you think that this URL of the stub will actually rely? Since we run here on this machine, both the tests and the stub, it means that the stub will always be on localhost if you see it from the perspective of the test. So then what we want here is saying that the book cover URL is localhost on the port 8081. Why the port 8081? Because this is the one we configured here. No. And then use the exact path that we will define and expect, and I will simply assume this is /cover or something like that, but in the real world, in a real world application, you will know exactly what path is, and normally you can use whatever path you want, but in a real world application, it's basically recommended that you add the path that you actually have. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna say static void. Usually it's a static method because you only have one single service per all the suits. It doesn't really make sense to have one and to close it every time, because then it costs a lot of time. So what we do is define one stub and then configure it whatever we want every time. Now we configure it with those URLs that we presumably call. So in my case, I will name this configure wiremock, yeah, why not, or configure properties. I think I use this name from time to time. And then a dynamic property registry. This is the registry. This is the object that will be injected and used by mock MVC to get all the properties that it needs at runtime, which means that here we need to ensure that we configure all the properties. Fortunately for us, because we are in the simplest of the situations, the only property you need to define here is the only URL that our proxy calls, which is that cover URL. Now, before I forget, for this dynamic property registry to be injected, we need to use an annotation coming from wiremock called dynamic property source. And now we are ready to say in the registry, okay, it looks good, in the registry, add, and then very importantly, we need to ensure this is exactly how we defined in the proxy, which you see is book.cover.url. So book.cover.url, no, because this is the property which it will replace, no, and then http localhost 8081, and then I will need normally to have also paths, no, I will invent the path here, it doesn't matter, no, but normally I need to have paths as well, because in reality maybe here it would have worked with the root, no, because I only have one endpoint. This is a very dumb example, the simplest to allow you focus on what we are doing, but in a real world application you might have multiple endpoints, and then you need to have, no, they need to differentiate from one another, otherwise you won't be able to configure them, you won't be able to configure the stub. So we defined the URL. That means our test can now use this mock. That was easy, no? And then in the same place, no, because we have assumptions. I will take you back to the theory. Assumptions, call of the method in this case, not the endpoint. The method will further call the endpoint. So the test method call, and then at the very end we have the assertions. No, these are the three parts, the three main blocks of an unit or integration test. Here in the assumptions we will have to use a new method which we call stub4, and this stub4 method, which is part of the wiremock, no, framework that we are using, or library, or maybe library is better to say, this will allow you to define the rule, and the rule here will be the path equal to something. So in this case, URL, see, URL equal to matching, path equal to path matching, path template. So there are different ways in which you can refer to the path. For example, I can use here the URL equal to cover. This is basically what will come, and then it's a very similar. Now look at this. This when here, this is when this method with this parameter is called, then do something. The same is with the stub. Stub URL equals 4, and then you will have the will return, and then yeah, you have to define what exactly will that basically return. So URL equal to mapping builder. Stub 4, and then you have to define the method itself as well. Apologize for that, because it doesn't know it's supposed to get a delete now. You need to define that as well. So this is it actually. Good. So now let's recap it. So this when here is the same as this part here, which says stub 4 any get where the URL has the path basically covered here. I'm not sure 100% that I don't have to put the whole URL, or I have to use here maybe path equal to. I think it's actually path equal to maybe. No, URL, because I need to also mention the method. No, because otherwise I don't have the method. If I would have used path equal, then I don't put the method. Good. So stub 4 any get operation, the HTTP get, where the URL is with the path covered in this case, and then return. Now see, when something, then return, when something, then return, and then you provide with what you expect. Any response. No, if you are not if you don't want to be precise, you only want to have something, you say any response with a status, with headers, with body, if you want to have anything like that. Now normally here with body should have actually something like a byte array, no, because it's if I correctly remember, now here in the proxy this is actually returning a byte array. So yeah, you can make it return a string, but it's strange now because you can't test it. So you just have like a byte array here, a dummy byte array, and you assume this is the picture, and that's it. So then of course what you can further do is you can test that the byte array is the one that you expect. So then it is when this, then you get an empty optional. That means it steps over the if. It sets the cover here. It gets the cover. We expect the cover will be this one. No. So then you can somewhere after the method calling the assertions here say assert array equals in my case, and then the book cover should be exactly the one that we have mocked. We have instructed our stub to return. That ensure us that when this method was called, then exactly what the server returned from outside was retrieved by our application and set on the book itself, the book that was added. And then of course here more assertions. Normally you have to put all your assertions in practice. So you need to have proper tests. You need to think about all the possible assertions, which means that you need to test the title, you need to test the ISBN in this case, you need to verify. We've learned to verify that the save method has been called. No, this was the way we were doing it. Now it was called once. All of this still stays, and yeah, I do prefer actually to use normally static methods. No, because they are easier to and then the verify is not the correct one or what? It's the verify. It's a verify. We have a verify actually also in Mockito, so that's why it tried to use. I will put it back actually, because in this case we have two methods with the same name. Now one from Mockito and the other one from WireMock, and that's why it was happening. Okay, fine enough. And yeah, we can first of all run it. I'm not sure if I hope I didn't mess anything with the test. I just tried it very, very quickly. But what I want to do then is maybe go a little bit with the debugger. No, look, it says it didn't pass for some reason. So we need to understand why usually. Expected not null. Something came null here, which is probably this one. So this assertion, which means that the book was returned null. And if I'm looking at the service itself, so the book here from the save, exactly what I wanted to do. No, let's go from the first line. I wanted to go with anyway step by step with you, and that's for understanding what exactly happens here. So let me actually do that, because that's actually very important. So I've started with the debugger. I'm waiting it to run now. Okay, and we can see that you remember from last time that IntelliJ didn't show us exactly that these are mocks for some reason. But if you go inside, so you see this is a mock, okay? And this is not a mock, no? The proxy needs not to be a mock. That was the whole idea. So it's good that the repository, it's a Mockito interceptor. That's what we expected. Now you can see it here. It's a Mockito mock. Fine, that's what we expected. And it's normal also that the cover proxy is the real object, because in case of the cover proxy, we really want it to be the real object which calls our stub that we defined outside. So in that being said, let's go line by line. So we stepped over this because the is present will say it's false, because we returned an empty optional, and then we will step over this. And the problem here is that I don't see exactly what happens, because it's in the book. But see, the book here, it's actually the book that we store is normal. ID is null, which is expected because it hasn't been actually saved yet. And then the cover, it's actually okay as well. So it looks like our stub is working correctly. So then it's interesting. Probably I've missed something in the assert. Why that test tells it's a null. So I'm gonna go outside of this, and still the added book has been returned. In this case, it's very likely because of the change I made. So save should actually, okay, sorry for that. So that's the problem. So I didn't mock the save. Okay, so that means it's actually not doing exactly what I wanted because of that. No, so I should have actually mocked this as well. I'm gonna use here my other keyboard for that, because I can't copy paste. So say save, and then save for the book will return, and then I need to have the book also containing the as a result. No, so that will be similar one, and added, so saved book here it is, boom, and then return the saved book, and then we expect that the saved book will also have a cover which should be the 1, 2, 3, no? And now it should be okay. But I will explain you why this is actually not really a good test for the moment. I will keep it this way because I don't have any chance to make it today the way it should be, because we would have to run into the repository stubbing, which is something a lot more important. See, I made it green, okay? And that's something that we will discuss next time because it's a longer subject. So what happens now? No, let's try again going through the breakpoints here. So what happens now is the following. Now I'm gonna debug it. So that I can show you what happens line by line. So this is a mock object. We have instructed the mock that when this method is called, it returns an empty optional. This is why when I will click next, it will step over the if, because this is present will be false. But then it does exactly what we expect. And if you want to prove it even further, we can put a breakpoint here, and you can go next and see that it actually goes into the real proxy. You will also be able to see that the real proxy uses the mock URL, the HTTP 8081 cover. Where does this come from? It comes from here. No, because we configured our wire mock with this URL. And then we instructed the stub that whenever this is called, the value returned will be a byte array with 1, 2, 3. And with content type image. I think for my test I was using PNG, but it doesn't really matter because it's a test. No, I'm going back. No, so I'm gonna just go next, and then I'm gonna check the book and ensure that indeed is the one that has been returned 1, 2, 3. And then of course this save is mock now. And this is basically, this is a problem here. This save is a mock, but normally I would prefer in this case to have it as well, either to have it as a real object and get the real saved book and then compare it. I think that would have been the best, because if I'm calling it now, there is no way in which I can really check that what this object returns is exactly what has been set on the book. And I will prove that. It's important now to know how to understand how this works. Because now if I'm gonna go here and change 1, 2, 3 with 1, 2, 4, no, and run again this, normally it will still pass, but it's not correct, no? This is a wrongly implemented test. And it's wrongly implemented because I didn't use a correct strategy up to the end. No? So look, I've changed my response to 1 to 4, but the assertion here still tells me that the book has 1, 2, 3. So clearly something is not good. It's either my stub not working, but I doubt that's the case. We can prove that the stub is still working. We can add a breakpoint here. Let's prove that our stub works correctly and understand this to the end. Good. So I'm gonna step further. And we take a look in the book. 1, 2, 4. Correct. No? So our stub works correctly. That application, that fake server that we are using and that our test is calling works correctly. it did indeed return to the test 124. What is wrong in our test here is that we mock the save method. And then you cannot really test exactly that this happened. So be very sure that you don't get into this kind of a situation in a real test, because then your test is has flaws. What we would normally have here is the book repository should also not be a mock. We should actually use a stub in the same way to use to test the repository calls correctly and retrieves correctly data from a database. But this is a little bit more difficult than stubbing a proxy. We have some options that we will discuss in the next episode. We could use a real database, we could use an in-memory database, but my favorite of them all, we would use test containers. So stubbing a database is a little bit more difficult now than stubbing a proxy. Stubbing a proxy allows you to stub any HTTP call, like we did here. And then depending on how you configure it, test anything you want. Again, what happens when the response is wrong? What happens when it's right? What happens when it has delays? You can test this way circuit breakers, retry mechanisms, and so on and so forth. If you really want, I can go into detail like next time and do more examples like with repeat patterns and stuff like that. But I think you actually got the idea, no? I would actually next time go into the database stuff and discuss also how can we avoid mocking repositories, which will enable us write an complete integration test. And in this particular case, you see I'm starting from the object, so I'm testing the book service. But the same way, I could have actually combined this, what you have learned today, with the mock MVC. So you can actually test from before the controller of the endpoint, controller, service, proxy, stub object, back. The entire flow to the stub object. And then when we learn how to stub the database, you will basically have like before controller, service, proxy, stub object, repository, stub database, back, all the logic, the entire flow. And you can this way test the whole integration, not only for the integration with the client, with the services, with the databases, the objects inside, and the framework itself. You have the flexibility to test whatever you want. And then that doesn't mean that you always need to test everything. And that's why you need to compose a testing strategy. But thinking about your application, choosing then the right combination of tools according to the compromises you want to make to test exactly what is essential for your system to be tested. Coding is dead, don't waste your time. Oh my god, I'm looking forward for that to happen, because up to now it didn't. So thank you for your opinion, but I don't think coding is dead yet. I'm still learning it a lot. Should we use test containers to mock repository? Yes, but pay attention not to mock repository. We use it the opposite, to avoid mocking repository. No? So to avoid mocking repository, my favorite option is using test containers. Yeah, that's what I prefer. We have three options: real database, in-memory database, and test containers. I don't say that all the time test containers is the best, but in the majority of cases you will find out that it's the best practice when you want to do something like that. Now, it doesn't make sense to go deeper with that today. It's a longer subject. We want to take it into more details and to the real details and discuss it step by step. So that's why today I'm gonna close, and I hope you found this topic very useful as well, and you will hopefully find it in your tests and when defining your testing strategy. We still have things to learn, so for that, meet you next time. Thank you very much for being here with me. I'm waving goodbye, and thank you for your attention. Cheers, everyone.